Top 10 Stupid Mistakes That Ended a Serial Killer's Career, 2020. We all make mistakes, but when you're living life on the wrong side of the law, even a small slip-up can spell disaster. Today on Odd Occasions, we're counting down the top 10 stupid mistakes that ended a serial killer's career. From parking tickets to clogged toilets, these killers thought they had it all figured out, until one foolish blunder brought them down. So, if you're ready to see how some of the world's most dangerous criminals were caught in the dumbest ways, sit back, relax, and let's get into the countdown. Number 10. Driving under the influence, while a dead body rode shotgun. Randy Kraft, also known as the Scorecard Killer, thought he had the perfect cover as he prowled the streets, evading capture for years. Convicted of killing 16 people and suspected of murdering as many as 67, Kraft was notorious for targeting young men across California. But in 1983, his downfall came not from an elaborate police sting, but from one very simple mistake: driving under the influence. Late one night, police spotted Kraft's car swerving erratically along the highway. They pulled him over, and as he stepped out of the vehicle, he casually tossed a beer bottle aside, practically inviting the officers to take him downtown. The arresting officer, suspicious and alert, moved to check on the passenger sitting in the front seat, a young man who appeared to be sleeping, but no amount of prodding would wake him up. That's because the man was dead, a fact that the officers soon confirmed. In a single traffic stop, Randy Kraft's secret world of murder began to unravel. Evidence found in the car, along with a scorecard of cryptic names and numbers, tied him to a string of other murders, ending his reign of terror. Randy Kraft's story is a stark reminder that sometimes it's the smallest mistakes, like drinking and driving, that bring even the most dangerous killers to justice. Number 9. Stealing a car. If you're a serial killer on the run, stealing a car might not be the brightest idea. But that's exactly what led to the capture of one of the most infamous killers in history, Ted Bundy. In 1978, Bundy had managed to evade law enforcement for years, leaving a trail of at least 30 victims across multiple states. By then, he'd become America's most wanted man. But in the end, it wasn't a daring chase or a high-stakes manhunt that brought him down. It was a routine traffic stop. Bundy was driving through Pensacola, Florida, when Officer David Lee of the Pensacola Police Department noticed the car behaving suspiciously. Running the plates, Officer Lee quickly discovered that the car was stolen, and with that, Ted Bundy's luck ran out. He was pulled over, arrested, and his long career of eluding justice was finally over. After years of evading capture, you'd think Bundy would have been more careful. But one careless, desperate decision brought this notorious killer to justice, proving that sometimes even the most dangerous criminals can be undone by the simplest mistakes. Number 8. Getting a parking ticket. You'd think a serial killer's capture would involve complex detective work, surveillance, and maybe a high-speed chase. But for the son of Sam, it all came down to something as mundane as a parking ticket. David Berkowitz had terrorized New York City for over a year, killing 6 people and wounding several others, all while taunting the police and the media with cryptic letters. But in the end, it wasn't his threats or the mounting fear in the city that led to his capture. It was a simple ticket slipped under a windshield wiper. In July 1977, on the night of his final attack, Berkowitz parked near the scene where he shot Robert Violante and Stacy Moskowitz. Witnesses reported seeing a suspicious car in the area, and when investigators combed through parking violations from that night, they found Berkowitz's name. That minor parking ticket placed him at the scene, and it was just the evidence they needed to obtain a search warrant for his apartment. When they arrived, they found the infamous .44 caliber revolver, along with his journal and other incriminating items. And just like that, David Berkowitz's reign of terror came to an end. While he faced multiple murder charges, one has to wonder, did he ever pay that ticket? Number 7. Clogging the toilet. Clogged drains are usually just an inconvenience, but for Dennis Nilsen, they became the reason his murderous spree came to an end. In 1983, Nilsen was convicted of 6 murders, although it's suspected the real number was much higher. Known as the Muswell Hill murderer, Nilsen had moved into a second-floor apartment in North London after previously living on a ground floor. Without a yard for burials, he needed a new method for getting rid of his victims, and in his twisted mind, he found one, flushing their remains down the toilet. At first, Nilsen managed to dispose of his victims quietly, but over time, his disturbing methods caught up with him. The decomposing flesh he'd tried to flush was clogging the building's plumbing, leading to complaints from tenants about the persistent stench and overflowing drains. When plumbers arrived to inspect the pipes, they made a grisly discovery: human remains clogging the drains. Authorities were called in, and it didn't take long for them to trace the source back to Nilsen's apartment. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Dennis Nilsen was arrested, ending his reign of terror. In the end, it wasn't his cunning or ability to evade capture that failed him. It was a plumbing problem. Just goes to show, you can try to hide your crimes, but even the smallest mistake can bring you down. Number 6. Trusting the authorities. When it comes to trusting others, we all know it can be risky business. For Dennis Rader, better known as the BTK Killer, trusting the authorities became his ultimate downfall. Rader, whose name stood for bind, torture, and kill, terrorized Wichita, Kansas for decades. Between 1974 and 1991, he took 10 lives, leaving investigators baffled as he managed to evade capture year after year. Then, suddenly, he disappeared, until 2004, when he reemerged to taunt the police, convinced he was untouchable. As part of his renewed game, Rader sent investigators packages filled with coded messages, even asking if it was safe to send information on a floppy disk. Investigators responded with a message in the Wichita Eagle, assuring him it would be perfectly safe. And just like that, the BTK Killer took the bait. He sent a floppy disk to the police, trusting their word. But authorities weren't about to play fair. They extracted metadata from the disk, tracing it back to a church where Rader was president of the Congregation Council. They cross-referenced the name on the file with DNA samples taken from his daughter's medical records, confirming his identity. After evading capture for 30 years, Dennis Rader was finally arrested, all because he trusted the very people he had taunted for so long. It's true what they say: love all, trust few. And maybe, just maybe, don't strangle people. Dennis Rader's misplaced trust in the authorities brought his killing spree to an end, proving that sometimes even the most elusive killers make a mistake they can't escape. Number 5. Dropping an ID at the crime scene. Rule number 1 for getting away with murder: don't leave your identity behind. It's basic stuff, but serial killer Peter Goebbels seemed to miss the memo. Active in Berlin between 1984 and 1985, Goebbels targeted and strangled 4 victims, each crime leaving the city more on edge. But what ultimately made him infamous wasn't the brutality of his actions. It was his stupidity. Goebbels became known as the killer who was careless enough to leave his own ID at a crime scene. After one of his murders, Goebbels accidentally dropped his identification card at the scene, essentially handing the authorities everything they needed to track him down. Investigators couldn't believe their luck. With his name and address conveniently left behind, they didn't have to spend months connecting the dots. Instead, it was more like an open and shut case. Peter Goebbels' story reminds us that sometimes it's not meticulous detective work that brings down a killer. It's the killer's own incompetence. The only thing that could have made his blunder worse would have been if he'd freed a victim because he thought they liked him. Lesson learned: if you want to avoid arrest, maybe keep a tighter grip on your wallet. Number 4. Releasing a victim who pretended to like them. Most people would agree that you shouldn't kill. And if you've crossed that line, letting a victim go simply because they pretend to like you is probably not the best strategy. But in the case of Bobby Joe Long, that's exactly what led to his downfall. Long had terrorized Florida, abducting and murdering women in a spree that had law enforcement scrambling. But when he captured 17-year-old Lisa Noland, his mistake was underestimating his victim. Noland, a survivor of past abuse, knew exactly what to do to survive the harrowing 24 hours she spent with Long. She kept her composure, pretending to sympathize with him, playing her part as he poured out his twisted thoughts. Nolan told him what he wanted to hear, convincing Long that she felt something for him. She played her part so well that in a move that defied all logic, he actually drove her home, believing he could trust her not to report him. Though she was blindfolded for most of the encounter, Nolan remembered crucial details about the car and his voice. Once safe, she went straight to the authorities, sharing everything she could. Her bravery and quick thinking provided police with the clues they needed to track down Bobby Joe Long and finally end his killing spree. Bobby Joe Long's lapse in judgment brought him to justice. Sometimes it only takes one wrong decision, trusting the wrong person, to bring a killer's reign of terror to an end. Number 3. Bragging about their latest kill. If there's one rule every serial killer should follow, it's to keep quiet. But for the Lainz Angels of Death, a group of nurses turned serial killers, that lack of discretion was exactly what brought them down. Operating out of a hospital in Vienna, Austria, these so-called angels were led by the infamous Waltraud Wagner, the self-proclaimed head angel. Over several years, the group targeted vulnerable patients using a chilling array of methods, from poisoning and overdosing to even drowning. By the time they were caught, the Lainz Angels of Death were linked to at least 42 murders, though investigators suspect the real number may have been over 200. For years, they operated in the shadows, hidden behind the walls of a trusted medical facility, but their arrogance eventually caught up with them. In 1989, while chatting in a local bar, the group began boasting about their latest kill. Unbeknownst to them, a doctor was seated nearby. He overheard their morbid conversation, including graphic details that left no doubt about their guilt. Shocked by what he heard, the doctor reported the conversation, prompting an investigation that revealed the full extent of the group's crimes. Due to Austria's maximum sentencing laws, all members of the Lainz Angels of Death were released by 2008, but their chilling legacy remains. This dark chapter serves as a reminder, sometimes it's the killer's own words that bring them down. Number 2. Going to the barber with a victim's blood still in their hair. Most of us know that a quick trip to the barber can make you feel like a new person. But if you're a serial killer fresh from a murder, it might be best to hold off on that haircut, especially if your victim's blood is still in your hair. Earle Leonard Nilsen, known as the Gorilla Strangler, didn't seem to grasp this simple concept. By 1927, Nilsen was a wanted man, accused of killing at least 26 women across the United States and Canada. His brutal methods and sheer strength left a trail of terror. After killing one of his victims, Emily Patterson, he lost some of his own hair during the struggle. So what did Nilsen do next? He decided to stop by the local barbershop for a shave and a haircut. But Nilsen overlooked a crucial detail. The barber quickly noticed the dried blood in his hair, along with fresh scratches on his scalp. When Patterson's body was discovered and police began searching for clues, the barber was able to provide a detailed description, connecting Nilsen directly to the crime. Earle Leonard Nelson's reckless decision led to his capture, proving once again that when you're on the run, some mistakes can be just as incriminating as the crime itself. Going for a fresh cut with blood still in your hair, not exactly the best way to stay under the radar. Number 1. Bringing their friend to see the corpses. Artists love to show off their hard work, and usually their friends are more than happy to take a look. But for Charles Schmid, the Pied Piper of Tucson, that hard work was a pair of teenage corpses. Schmid, notorious for his charm and charisma, lured in young girls with ease, earning his nickname by drawing his teenage followers wherever he went. But his crimes went far beyond his magnetic appeal. Schmid was ultimately convicted of 3 murders, but it's likely he would have claimed more victims if he hadn't made one fatal mistake. Eager to brag, he took his friend, Richard Bruns, out to the desert to show him where he had buried the bodies of the Fritz sisters, 2 young girls he had murdered. Schmid might have thought he'd impressed Bruns, but instead, he'd sealed his own fate. Horrified, Bruns turned Schmid in, and soon after, the Pied Piper of Tucson was behind bars. Maybe Schmid thought he could trust his friend, but in the end, his need to show and tell brought his killing spree to an end. It just goes to show, even the most feared killers can't resist the urge to brag, and sometimes it's that urge that finally catches up with them. And that wraps up our list of the top 10 stupid mistakes that took down some of the world's most notorious killers. Just goes to show that no matter how calculated or terrifying they seemed, in the end, it was a simple slip-up that put them behind bars. Which of these mistakes surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the dark side of history. Thanks for watching Odd Occasions. We'll see you next time, and remember, crime really doesn't pay.